button. Hi, and welcome to a special 2-on-1 edition of Newsmakers TV, Santa Barbara's most popular local news analysis program, on the air since 2014. I'm Jerry Roberts. It is Friday, August 25th, 2023, the day after we all were treated to the spectacle of the mugshot of the twice impeached, 4 times indicted former president of the United States, now charged with 91 felony crimes and counting. At his booking in Georgia, Donald Trump claimed to be 6'3" and 215 pounds. So if I'm ever arrested, I'm going to say I'm 4'11" and weigh 280. So when people see me, they'll say, hey, you look like you lost a lot of weight. But I digress. Today, I am very pleased to welcome back to the program a real heavyweight of Santa Barbara City Council. Josh, you see how I did that? Councilmember Eric Friedman. Eric represents District 5, not to mention the sensible political center on council. He was first elected in 2017, re-elected to a 5-year term in November 2021, and now is the subject of speculation about a future run for mayor. We'll be asking him about that and many other things, as I'm joined in the questioning by my colleague Josh Molina, who covers politics for Newshawk and is the maestro of the must-listen podcast, Santa Barbara Talks. Thank you both for coming. Hey, Eric, before we jump into it, we were talking about your sons before, both in high school now. Did you happen to read Josh's piece this week in Newshawk about his kid going off to college? Hey, I thought that was a terrific piece.
Yeah, no, it was great. I was actually gonna mention it. My wife she hasn't read it yet because she knows she's gonna tear up when she reads it. So because we only have a couple of years left. I'm only 2 years behind you with my oldest son. But I thought it was really well done and really heartfelt. It was one of those things that is important to have stuff like that in our local media because it just is uplifting and we can all relate to it. So I just want to thank you, Josh, for putting that out there. And it's stuff I got to look forward to as well. And now I'm starting to think after reading your articles, like my older son, he could be a little loud sometimes and it could be a little annoying, but I'm going to miss that when he's gone. So that's what I have to look forward to.
Yeah, everybody should check out that piece. Very, very lovely piece, Josh.
Highly recommend reading it.
And very, very vulnerable. You put yourself out there in a way. And I got to say, I said goodbye to my oldest grandson this week, who went off to Washington, D.C. to go to college. And in a lot of ways, it was actually harder than when my own kids left. So doesn't get any easier. Anyway, nice piece, Josh. Congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, Eric, so you represent District 5. Remind our listeners what neighborhoods are included in District 5 as we jump in here.
So it's everything on the north side of Las Pacitas, San Roque. So Hope, La Cumbre, Hidden Valley, plus San Marcan. And then it does include the airport as well.
Yeah, and one of the big issues in District 5, of course, is the future of La Cumbre Plaza, and with Macy's on its way out, Sears already left, and there's been a lot of controversy already about housing being built there. What's the latest on that? What's the status of that whole situation, Eric?
So there's the 3 separate entities. There's the Sears, and then there's the mall itself in the center, and then there's the Macy's building. And the owners of the Macy's building have put in an application through state bonus density law, which means that they get a higher number of units for a certain percentage of affordable units in their property. So they put that application in to the city some months ago, and the city reviewed it. And there is a speed up timeline when you're dealing with state bonus density that's required. But we do have review, and they still have to meet certain levels of review. So our staff reviewed it, sent it back to them with a request for more information, and we have not received anything back at this time. So the ball is really in their court to see what they're going to resubmit to us. And then once they do, then that clock starts ticking, and we will see where it goes from there.
And what about the other 2? You mentioned the mall and Sears. What's going on with that?
So the Sears property is, last time I've spoken with them, they are still looking at their different options with a different developer on housing for the Sears site. They haven't submitted anything to the city, And then there is the center of the mall, which is where all the businesses are there, the arts and others. And that has a long-term lease by the National Mall Retailer Macerich. And that's a 75-year or so lease. So that's a little more complex in terms of them having that vested right. So the first project is going to be the Macy's project. And once that comes in, and that will really kind of set the tone for the rest of the mall when it comes in there. And the major issue with that is part of their proposal that they put in was that one of the buildings that they're proposing would be 74 feet or so, and the city charter only allows 60. Ironically, the bell tower that's there is about 74 feet, depending on where you measure it from. So that's an issue we're going to have to grapple with and how to address that, because there is the city charter, but the state laws have changed in terms of trying to increase more housing. So once we get their proposal back, then we will evaluate where we go from there.
You think we're going to end up in litigation on that point? We'll challenge that housing, the state housing mandate?
I hope not, because at the end of the day, I think redevelopment is a good thing for that part of that plaza. It's not like it was when we were kids down there. You know, the center of Uptown, there was a lot of activity there. So housing is a great option there. It's just a matter of how it gets built and in what manner, and how the public can understand from the ground floor, preferably the ground floor up from the first day when that gets proposed. So we'll see where it goes. I'm hopeful that we can not litigate, but who knows where that's going to go. It just
Yeah,
really
well, I gotta say, I remember, I'm old enough to remember when you first ran in 2017, and you were the first, and as I recall, only candidate running for anything at that year that actually noted that there were all these housing mandates coming down from Sacramento, and gee, we better prepare for that. And everybody else was kind of off in la la land with all other ideas. Just before we leave the La Cumbre thing, of course, there was a lot of talk about a so-called special plan, something that would encompass the whole area, and Supervisor Das Williams famously screwed the city on that by torpedoing a planning grant. Is that dead in the water? Is that a dead letter now, that there will be a special plan that would take in the whole project?
Not at this time. The time to do it would have been when the SBCAG grant funding was available. And that would have been the appropriate time, and we could have been doing a lot of that work right now. But at this point, it's not coming back. I don't see the city having the funding to do that on our own. If you're talking $1 million plus. So right, and then you have the unknowns of having the state application, and because the state fast tracks these, and how that would go with a specific plan now. So really, we've gone down that path of not moving that grant forward to do the specific plan. So now we need to work with the property owners of Macy's on their application, and see if we can extract as much public benefit in addition to housing as possible, and address the traffic circulation, the water, waste, all those issues, public open space, and those types of things.
Yeah. What did you think when Das did that, though? I mean, it seemed a little contradictory. Here, the county wants to put 2/3 of the new housing down in the South Coast, and then in a fit of pique, he decides to screw us out of that. What was your reaction?
I disagreed that we couldn't move it forward, go forward with it, but that's what happened, and we got to move on, and that's where I'm at now.
See, Josh, this is what I mean by he's sensible. I hate that. It just drives me crazy. What do you got, Josh, on housing or anything else?
Well, Eric, Councilmember Friedman, I wanted to talk to you about housing and the nexus between hotels, because I've been covering Planning Commission, HLC meetings lately, and these design review boards have been really tough on hotels, and Planning Commission, I'll add them there too, land use group. They've been really tough on hotels, and Commissioner Devin Wardlow, like, really emerging on the Planning Commission as this pro housing, anti hotel. We've got that Garden Street project. We've got other projects. There's talk of reviving the hotel moratorium. Where do you stand? I mean, there is a feeling right now among people in the city, no more hotels. We can't not allow hotels. We have to only approve housing, and we're seeing it pop up all over the town. What's your take on this?
So if you recall, about a year and a half or 2 years ago, I actually brought forward to the council the idea of putting a temporary moratorium on hotels until we could get our housing element, our new housing element updated. I thought it made sense. I do agree with the argument that when you're creating hotels, there are the lower wage service sector industry that cannot afford to live here, so you're exacerbating a problem. But I also understand that it's not just the hotels that we're relying upon that have the lower wage industries. So the notion from the hotels is, well, you're singling us out. And so, but I did bring it forward. The council at the time adopted not to go forward with it. And so now we're in a situation where the council is actually opined, and until we change our minds, that hotels, they are allowed uses, they're in the general plan. And when you're looking at properties such as the one on State Street that just came forward, originally they had proposed housing, but the cost to develop housing doesn't pencil out as much as a hotel does. And we need to look at our policies in the city in terms of incentivizing housing, so that there's an incentive for developers to, when they're weighing the two, that housing becomes more of an attractive option than to go to a hotel. The concern I have is if it's zoned and it's within the general plan, that a proposal comes forward from a hotel and you don't allow it, but they can't say, for whatever reason, they can't make a housing project pencil out. What options does that leave a developer? And what is the risk for the city? Because if they're checking all the boxes that we say, if you have a legal right to do this and we're telling you can't, then is there a legal risk for the city in terms of litigation? And last thing, I think the worst thing we can do is spend money on lawyers in the city if we can avoid it. But with that being said, we really need to have a conversation about how do we incentivize more housing. With the right property down in the funk zone, that's a unique circumstance. And I understand where the pushback came. They actually have agreed to, as I understand it, look at getting 6 units back because of some of that give and take with the commission. But with that one, they have the specific plan they had back in the 90s. The trade-off was that they extended Garden Street all the way down to the beach. So the city has already extracted that value that we all enjoy. And just because they didn't effectuate the rights they had within 5 or 10 or 15 years, doesn't mean those go away. And so we have to be very careful with a project like that, because the big project, and we're talking maybe San Nuevo or others, if we wanted to go down a path with other property owners to get public benefit with a sped up process and some vested rights, like say a specific plan or something like we did on Milpas Street, where we fast tracked a project to get more affordable housing. If there's any inclination that you could go into an agreement, and then because the political winds change, there's pushback when you try to effectuate it, we're going to miss opportunities to actually get better projects. And so I know there's a lot of developers that are watching what happens with that project in particular, but they're also looking at what is the sound reasoning for denying projects or not letting them go forward, because they need the certainty that what's on the books in terms of ordinances and zoning can be built. And so that's the trade-off that's out there.
I mean, that's a huge point. And I didn't watch a planning commission meeting, but I did read Josh's coverage of it. And it seemed to me that several of the planning commissioners, Devin being primarily the one, were kind of getting out over their skis and sort of exceeding what their authority is there. I mean, they're trying to make policy there. They're supposed to be looking at design criteria and so on. Do you have any concern about that, specifically about this project, which, as you say, they have a long-term agreement to be able to do?
You know, there's always gonna be concerns with a project when you're talking on that scale and in a neighborhood like that that's going to transition. But I think we need to look at what is in the original agreement from 40 plus years ago, and remember that we extracted that value. We already got the public value for that by having Garden Street extended all the way to Cabrillo. So in terms of how much have they given, is most that they're going to give? That there is a point at which they can go back and say we already have this agreement. So At this point, again, I haven't been, it hasn't come to council. I haven't read all the staff reports as if I would, as if it was at council, but I'm watching it and keeping up to date on it. And I think that we need to really get that going forward so that it also sends a message to the other developers who are looking at housing that we can get something done, and we do understand, our owners zoning, and that the council has certain policies that are being implemented. So the other concern is, yeah, the council sets the policy, so it is a concern when commissions get out in front of the council. But at the same time, I think having that discussion, it informs the council that these issues are out there of a concern, and not only from the public, but from our own boards that we rely on to give us accurate information.
All right, Eric, I wanted to follow up a little bit and ask you about the affordability issue, because it can be a little maddening as an observer, as a journalist covering this, because you have people arguing for more housing. We need more housing. We all agree on that. But they act as though the housing that the city, the county that is going to be creating through these state mandates is going to be affordable. And it's not, most of it, right? It's really dependent on the inclusionary policy of that agency. And so when we're talking about housing, we're really talking about housing that's super expensive. And I know that I've heard the counter argument, which is, well, people who live in other places that are less affordable or that are more affordable can then move into these places, and that frees up the housing stock. So anyone watching who's like, Josh, you don't understand. I've heard that argument, but I don't really know that that is true or that works, because if you build, like, for example, Jim Cannell, SEMA's project downtown, if you build that as housing, there's no doubt that that's going to be $5,000 a month by the time it gets built for a two-bed.
For what, Josh? One or two bedrooms?
Maybe a one-bedroom by then. By the time it gets built, probably, who knows, And so that's not affordable for people who don't work at Amazon or these types of places. Certainly not the city of Santa Barbara, So I just wish there was a way that could be articulated. And I guess the question, Eric, is, how does the city of Santa Barbara create more middle income, 80 to 120%, and not where it's just the 15% or the 10%, it's like a majority of what's built? Is that possible? I mean, you guys can change your policies, right?
Well, thanks for putting the whole issue of middle income on my shoulders right now. I'm going to give you all the answer, and I'll have it done like that. No, if it was easy, it would be done already, and it's not. I actually agree to some extent with what you just said, Josh, in terms of, if you have that higher end housing, then people will move up. I do think that is some of it, and the more housing you have, because is better overall. But we don't have enough for people who can actually afford to live here at all income levels. You're talking, I've heard even doctors or medical professionals, they can't even afford to live here. So there's a few things that we can do at the city. And the reality is, if we're going to look to the private sector to solve the issue or create more affordable housing, we're never going to get anywhere close to where we need to be. So there has to be these public-private or public processes, or even public-private partnerships. And a lot of that comes, the Housing Authority is great at that, where they get private investment to come in through tax credits and they build their projects. Some innovative things that we're looking at is, right now, the Carrillo commuter lot, that was one where the city had the land. So we worked with the Housing Authority. So we gave the value of the land, which is estimated somewhere between 8 to 10 million. And so that takes it off the table. And then we specifically worked with the Housing Authority to try to get that 80 to 120 median income, because those are the groups that make too much to live here, but they don't make enough to live here because they don't qualify for subsidies. That's what happened to my family back in the 80s. And so we moved to Lompoc. And so what happens then is, now that project is going forward, and we will have some units that are in that price range. So we can look at our parking lots downtown. I think that's a long-term solution, because if all we have is one parking lot and that's it, well, we're missing what we could put on top of that. But we still need to maintain that parking for the businesses and others downtown. The other thing that's come up is Megan Harmon and I brought it forward is the Hope Fund, and that's creating a dedicated a fund where we have money that goes towards housing projects. And we worked with our staff and got the council to fully support it and bring it forward. The actual ordinance is still being worked on in terms of what the money could be eligible for and the tight restrictions on it, because you don't want it to be too big where it's not effective, but you want to be able to have some flexibility with it. But the reason that we put some money aside was last year when we had our budget surplus at the end of the year, is that we were able to allocate about $3 million and put it aside. So we have this pot of money of $3 million that is going to eventually go into this Hope Fund. And then what that does is allows the housing authority or others, if there's a project that's coming up, to apply to the city and say, we need a match, and we can match that at 10 to 1 dollars with this. And then the housing authority could come in or other housing providers and build more of that housing, and you get more units. The other thing that
wouldn't it make sense to just directly funnel that to the housing authority?
There might be other providers that like Habitat for Humanity or others that might want to do that. And there might, so there's other options available that good. And there might be options if you were, and I don't know if this is going to come out of the ordinance, but the discussion has been out there, is if you had a private developer and we were able to use some of that and it would offset the cost of the development, and you could get some income restrictions on, say, middle income on their units for a time. But I don't know if we're going to go in that direction, but that's something that came out of it. The other component of it, though, is that the other thing that I'm interested too, and I think a lot of others, are in lieu fees. And so, and I think this has come up at the Planning Commission, is when a private developer is coming in and building a housing project, rather than the 10% or in addition to the 10%, if they were able to, we were able to have some type of formula where they contributed significantly into a fund, such as the Hope Fund, and that builds that fund up. And so then rather than building 1 or 2 or 5 units, they get to the housing authority, and the housing authority can leverage it and get 10 or 15 units. So those are all things that we're looking at now, and hopefully they'll come to fruition.
All right, just to close on this, and I just want to clarify. So in terms of the hotel moratorium, it sounds to me like you favor a de facto moratorium, except for those projects which have existing agreements to build hotels. Is that accurate?
Trying to think of how you worded that. You confused me there. Where I'm at is I brought it forward a year and a half ago. And right now, if we want to have, I think we need to have a conversation just in general on hotels and other industries right now, that how do we get them to come to the table and say, how are you going to contribute to housing your own workforce? So if it does come back to the council, I'll consider it at that time. But like I said, I already brought it and it wasn't supported. And so if my colleagues want to bring it back, then we'll consider it. But I haven't heard anything about it being brought back right now.
So that would be no hotels unless you provide some housing in there for your workers or for someone else.
Yeah, that's something I would consider, is if you have a hotel, you should be able to either offset either that or pay into some type of fund to offset the cost of it. That's something that I think should be considered. I'd have to look at the mechanics of it, but that's something you could consider too, is if you know there's going to be workers that aren't going to be able to afford to live here, could that business contribute to a fund for housing rather than having to build it? And so maybe that might be a path we could go as well. The other concern I do have with too many hotels, just real quickly, is that theoretically it would increase the hotel bed tax, but we become so overly reliant on it that when downturns come, it hurts us significantly. It's just like the state, you have these big fluctuations. When times are great, they're great. When times are bad, they're bad. And you don't want to have that where you're overly reliant on one type of tax. And that's a concern I have if we keep building too many.
But what else do we have beside that in the sales tax? I mean, what?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. We need to find out other ways, but so that's just a concern I have overall.
All right. Let's talk a little State Street. We had the mayor on a couple weeks ago, and of course, he was the only one who joined in your eminently sensible proposal to not keep all 9 blocks of State Street on the promenade closed, but only 2 of them. And it seems like Councilwoman Snedden and others are kind of coming around to that idea, or at least creating a mechanism whereby that could happen in the short term rather than waiting for the gold at the end of the rainbow for the State Street Long Range Planning Committee. What happened exactly that week? This week, what did you guys approve in terms of sort of short-term changes to what can happen to State Street?
That's this coming Tuesday. We'll be looking at the options from the ad hoc committee, which was Kristen, Mike, and Oscar. They've done some work over the last number of months.
That committee's going away, right? You're going to meet as a committee of the whole.
What we did this past Tuesday was we disbanded that committee, and the recommendation that came before us was to create a new standing committee that was subject to the Brown Act. That would have been 3 members. And we decided to actually, the council as a whole should opine on this and give direction. So once a month for the foreseeable future, there will be an item on the council agenda on State Street, which will be an update from staff on all the interim operations. And we will have the ability to give direction if we want to try this or that. So the council as a whole and all of us will have input on it, which I think was the proper way to go.
So are you going to come back with your proposal to just, actually close the blocks where there's actual restaurants and parklets and stuff like that rather than all 9 blocks?
I have to see what the interim we can do, because I still think that's a good proposal. Ironically, it was not ironic, but coincidentally, Sheila Lodge had sent us an email that same weekend. And when I read her email, I realized we were like 90% the same. So it was just, and we're not always aligned. But I have a high respect for former Mayor Lodge, and so I think I've gotten pretty positive, very positive feedback from the community and those who've been out there and saying, it is sensible. It does kind of concentrate the promenade, and it allows for us to really see how the promenade works in certain areas. And the one issue is it's too long to walk, so it kind of addresses that and ability issues. But if there are other solutions that we can come up with to address the issue for seniors and those mobility challenges getting up and down, to clean up the parklets and the structures that might be looking at the aesthetics of State Street and the impacts to other businesses. If we can come up with other solutions, great, but that's still something that I would be interested in doing, is at least opening it up to vehicles in the areas where there's not as much foot traffic.
So when is the first time the council is going to meet as a committee of the whole on this issue?
We haven't set that date, but this coming Tuesday is the report out from the ad hoc committee. And they do have recommendations for interim measures. So there could be a discussion on that this coming Tuesday. There will be a discussion on that this coming Tuesday. And how the proposal that I propose gets folded into that discussion, we can discuss it. I don't think it's not agendized to act on it, but it is something we can have that discussion.
So will you pledge here today that at the first opportunity when the council so meets, you'll bring that back?
I am gonna bring back that discussion, and I'm gonna continue to advocate for having that change, even if it's just a few blocks. It doesn't necessarily have to be the whole way from the 700 block up, because what I've been doing is I said, if I was on the ad hoc committee, what would I have done? And the first thing I says is go out and talk to the businesses. So I've actually been going out and talking to many of the businesses on the 0 blocks, on Chapala, and some on State Street, just to get a sense of how the promenade's working. I've talked to over 20 businesses in the last few weeks, and there's a lot that I think is intuitive that we know, but there are a few surprises for me. And one of them that I think was interesting was the 500 and 600 block are working well. You can't deny that, and they have brought in energy. The 11 and 1200 block, the arts district that's coming out, and this was kind of the area where the State Street Master Plan Committee was one of the areas it focused on. That it is also building its own type of culture, and it has an energy that's going there. But I'm not sure if it's every night like the 500 and 600 block. So there might be opportunities where you can open up like during the week, but then on the weekends you close it down. So I'd like to look at what I had proposed and see if there's a way to refine it to meet those needs. And then the other thing that was interesting on Chapala that I found out is the businesses there say it's been helpful. Most of them have said it's been helpful because all the cars that used to go up State Street are going up Chapala. So you have a lot of cars that are driving by and seeing their businesses and going to park and come back. So there's just a lot, and it's been an interesting feedback from these
Josh?
businesses.
Hey, Eric, I don't want to spend too much on this, but I was watching the Tuesday's meeting and baffled because at the last meeting, everyone seemed like, oh, let's form a Brown Act, 3-member of the council committee. And then here we are, and everyone's like, no, this is a terrible idea. What's the backstory there? To me, as an observer, it felt like a little dig at Sneddon because she had really advocated for this when trying to broker a compromise. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but it was a big shift. Like you guys decided not to form this pilot committee, which was really a 180-degree turn from where you were at the last meeting. What's the real story there?
So I was the one that voted against it originally. It was a 6-1 vote originally, and for me, I just felt like at the time that I was being taken out of not intentionally, but if we had gone down that path, myself and Alejandra, who is not on either of these State Street committees, and the mayor as well, would have been taken out of the conversation because it would have never set. So then the proposal came back, and then I didn't realize it until it came back to us when we had the staff report that it was delegating like full authority to the 3 council members. And if they were split on any issue, we could be delegating authority to just 2 of them. And I don't think that when it came back to us in that type of sense, that we fully realized at the original time, because I think it was floated at the meeting. So, hey, this sounds like it could be something and be more be expedited, because when you come to the full council, it could slow things down. And so, yeah, let's support at the time. That was the majority of the council said that. But then when it came back and we got all the details, it's like, one, it's a Brown Act committee meeting. So you have city attorney, city clerk, city staff time. It's not nimble. Anything that costs actual dollars wise would have to come back to the council. So it could actually slow things down. And so the efficiencies weren't there. And then when I started digging a little more and found out that we hadn't actually ever, or I don't know what ever, but to anyone's knowledge recently from city staff, that we had never delegated the authority of the full council to a subcommittee like that to make actual policy decisions, because that's what they were making. And that if you look in the cities throughout the state, that is pretty rare in and of itself. It just became evident that this is more experimental doing something like that. And State Street is something that there are so many opinions of it. It affects the whole city. We need to have full representation from the entire council. And when I and other council members made that case at the meeting this past Tuesday, I think it was pretty clear. And I think the unease came that 2 council members could be making a decision for the full 7, and that wasn't clear originally.
Yeah, it felt like Councilmember Alejandro Gutierrez, Randy, obviously yourself, kind of pulled it back, like said, wait a minute, what are you doing? And I felt like there was it was like a victory for Randy and you behind the scenes to be able to say, we're not going to do it, because it was Kristen Sneddon's whole compromise at that last meeting, So anyway,
Yeah.
insider politics, but it was kind of just really fascinating to watch how that played out.
I'll just say it, for me, it was, I'm not on either of those 2 State Street committees, the master plan or this one. And that was intentional on my part, because I thought the Cumbre Plaza would have been further along, and I wanted to focus a lot of my energy. I thought it would be kind of where State Street is by this time. But now that we're getting to a critical point in State Street, I wanted to have a voice. I think I'm bringing in another perspective that some of the council as a whole hasn't been bringing to the conversation. I think they're considering it, but having the full council, I think, will serve us all. And it allows those who have differences of opinion in the public to feel heard when all 7 of us are out there making the decisions together. And that's what it was for me, was I wanted to be able to continue to have a voice and represent the constituents in my district, who I felt would have been excluded if I wouldn't have been on there.
So the meetings will go even longer into the night, and then Josh will, of course, be getting paid time and a half for overtime to cover all of them.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the practical. Hey, speaking of dissing Sneddon, as Josh mentioned, there was this byplay in recent weeks. Of course, the City Administrator Rebecca Bjork announced last week that she's going to be leaving. She's retiring. And there was this whole settle between her and Councilmember Sneddon about the budget. And Sneddon's allegations that there was a lack of transparency, that there was a secret set of numbers that was being gone. You know, you've chaired the budget committee. You know as much about the budget as anybody. Is she onto something there? Is there a lack of transparency? Is the public being denied the full truth about the budget?
Absolutely not. So first, I want to say that when you were talking about transparency, we went from having a budget that was not very transparent at all when I first got on council. It was a budget was presented in a binder, printed out binder that we got, and that was put up online, and that was it. And anytime there was any changes, which are going to happen from April till June when we adopt it, we got printed out pages, and those may or may not have gotten put online. So when we got a new finance director, Keith DiMartini, who is outstanding, and he's a top talent in the state. We're very fortunate to have him. And I've worked with him closely on a number of issues on the finance committee where we're doing a lot of good work. He and came up with the proposal that we have now. And so we have these online transparency tools, and they're new, and they have a ton of data. And so it's actually so transparent that it can become confusing because all these new data sets are out there. We have the two tools that kind of interact as one. One is the budget tool, which is the presented budget as it's the adopted budget or the presented budget, and that's static. And then you have the transparency tool, which they're constantly updating data as it comes in, as new numbers come in for sales tax or TOT or all that. And those come in constantly. So there is going to be some discrepancies because you have new data versus the old, and there's different ways to access it. And so it is confusing because it's brand new. And so I think we have an obligation as city staff and city council members to say, how can we improve the ability for the public to understand how to use these tools? That's what I think it was. And as it stays year after year and people become more comfortable with it, I think that those kinds of discrepancies that are out there will reduce. But it's one of those things where we became even more transparent, but then the conversation became less transparent. It was kind of, how did this get flipped around that we have so much more data and so much more ability for the public to understand it, yet the conversation as we're trying to hide things, it was the complete opposite.
Well, let me follow up on that and just go right to the big question about Rebecca Bjork. So in my head and others I've talked to, Rebecca got fed up. Like, I don't need this. I'm ready to go. I'm done. I was put in this position because I was supposed to steer the ship, and I'm done. And I'm not going to deal with, that budget sort of allegations or State Street being seen as an obstacle. And so she left. Now, I said that on Jerry's show, and, heard back from some people who said, oh no, she was always going to retire. She told us this, she made her decision in January. But also in January, she got a big raise. So let me just ask you, Eric, Rebecca Bjork, and please be as honest as you can here on the record. There's no way
nobody watches the show. Don't worry about a thing.
There's no way in January she's going to go in there and ask for a $40,000 raise and then retire in August. Like, that couldn't have been the plan, could it?
So I don't think that was the plan. So for one thing, I'm going to address the raise issue in a second, because I did have issues with that, but I ultimately supported it, and I'll tell you why in a second. But in terms of where Rebecca was, she has been at the city for 35 years, and I think she has the utmost integrity, and she loves the city. She loves the work, and she has been out there, and she does a fantastic job. And so when she became city administrator, it's a whole new set of challenges. And when we got through the budget and we have State Street, I think she took time to reflect, because she did take some hits. It's no doubt she did. But I also know that her love of the city and her ability to want to set the foundation for years to come, she's not going to make an irrational decision based on one moment in time on a whole career. So what she did is she took some time back in May or whenever it was, and reflected. And when you're looking forward, I think she actually saw that that if she was going to retire, because at this rate she's been here 35 years, so she'd probably only be here for a couple more years. At that point, even is if you're going to have a new city administrator coming in, and you have these major projects, such as Paseo Nuevo and what's going to happen with that, that's independent of State Street. They're tied at the hip, but they're different. You also have the Cumbre Plaza, and you also have the Fiscal Sustainability Initiative, where we're reorganizing the city to try to make it more efficient and provide a high level of services. These are all major initiatives that are going to take 3 to 5 years easily to implement them all. The master plan could take longer. So any new city administrator that's come in and we want to consider is going to be up for those challenges and want to do them. And it would be much better to have the new leadership of the city to come in for the next and be at the foundation of planning those and implementing them, rather than to come in at a halfway point. And so then you also, if you're coming in and it's like, well, you're changing shit midway because you have a different captain. So I think she looked at that and looked at all the challenges ahead, and that went into her thinking. In terms of the raise itself, I don't think it was really on the radar of anyone until it was coming up. And then it became evident that when you're looking at the market, she was under market compared to a lot of others. And this is the part I grappled with, is you have somebody who's making a high salary. And I get that. And we're trying to struggle to pay our employees who are, first responders and run the city, and can't have enough don't have enough to make their ends meet many times, unless they have 2 incomes. But then when you start looking and you look at the city of Goleta, made more. City Goleta, or the water district director, made significantly more. And then you start digging in and said, if we had gone with somebody outside the city and we had to get a headhunter to come in, we would have paid significantly on that. And anybody coming here who wasn't from here, said we'd gone outside, would have been hired at this much higher rate. Then all of a sudden it's like, we have somebody who has come to the city for all these years, our first female to lead the city. I don't know if that's right, but in recent times, to lead the city. And we're going to pay them significantly less. For example, not to pick on the city of Goleta, but the jobs are different. The city of Santa Barbara is a full service city. We run an airport, we run our water system, our wastewater system. We have the harbor, and then our police and our fire, on top of the day-to-day operations. Whereas most of the other cities don't have that. Some of them contract out or special districts do water and wastewater management. You have others that contract out in the county. So you have the city with the largest population on the South Coast that has all these services that was getting paid significantly less than the other counterparts. So that went into the thinking on it.
Yeah. So if I'm the average reader of Ed Hat, say, and I look at her getting a $40,000 raise in January and retiring in August, how are you going to convince me that that's nothing but a pension spike?
I don't convince people on head out of anything. It's a Wild West out there. So they're going to have their own opinions, and that is great, because that's the First Amendment right there, Jerry. They could say.
So you don't see it as, you don't think that's a legitimate way to view it?
If people want to view it that way, of course they can. And that is something they can view, but I'm saying all these other factors went into it. And I just don't see it as, you have the head of the city of Santa Barbara making significantly less than if we had paid somebody from out of the area to come in who we would have paid more, who hadn't had a 35-year history.
Well, now you're going to have to pay more anyway.
Yeah.
And the pension. Okay, great. All right.
I think just to clarify, like, I agree. I've reported on Rebecca for 20 years, back when she was in public works and, managing water, and she does have a lot of integrity, and she's super, super qualified and intelligent and brilliant. Like, we all know that. I think, so what? So January she comes in, she wants the raise, she wants to be the same as other comparable city managers. Okay, well, that's, you're in the job, you expect to do that. But I think the idea that she just quit because, it was time, I don't think that part is true. I think it's like she's listening to people challenging her about her, budget or integrity, State Street decisions, and she's so comfortable in her career and her professional experience. She said, I'm out. You guys deal with this without me. I think that's more
I mean,
likely
who needs everybody grabbing at the wheel all the time when you're trying to steer something? I mean, you know what I mean?
Well, I will say this in regards to the council. Whether it was intentional or not, yeah, it could be taken that way, that she took some punches during that. But like I said, she didn't retire because. But I think that whenever us as council, we have to be very deliberate in how we ask questions and the inferences that could come out of it, because it's not just the staff that are with us. It's the staff that we want to recruit when the time is right, and it's the sense that, hey, if you were coming here to be an executive, would you want to come here? And the first thing they're going to look at, they're going to look at compensation, but they're also going to look at the council and how the council interacts with them in public. And so we as a council have to understand that, and we need to do our best to ask questions to make sure there's transparency there, but also not come across as we're attacking people's integrity or not, whether it's intentional or not. Some people could have taken it that way through what you went through, but we have that responsibility to frame our questions in a way that supports staff, but also says, you know what, I need more answers. So to the extent that we can improve that, I think it'll go a long way for the next city administrator and the new executives that we have.
So what I hear you saying is that council member, your colleague, Councilmember Sneddon, was way out of line in the way that she asked these questions about the budget.
I don't think she was way out of line. What I think is that somewhere along the line, the message and the fact that we're even having this conversation is some people took it that she was attacking Rebecca. I don't think that was her intent. I think she was trying to have her questions answered. But we need to, as council members, understand that the way we ask things can be interpreted in many different ways. And I think there are other ways that the questions could have been asked. But again, going back to it, Rebecca is a professional, and she wouldn't make a decision on whether to retire based on how one moment in time. And so when she looked at the whole totality of it, she just made a decision that this was the time to come out and set the city up for success long term.
I will say this, whoever's side, whatever sort of theory you want to believe, the council does ask questions and hold staff accountable. I'd love to get this council to be the overseer of the Santa Barbara Unified School District, which is largely a rubber stamp board. And so if you compare the two, at least there are a couple people on council who are managing the manager, which in the unified, it's the superintendent's managing the board.
Yeah, and that was my comments, is we should ask the questions. We just have to be cognizant that sometimes it could be interpreted a different way, but that's why that's why I think that the questions are out there and they were asked, and they were good questions, because a lot of public had those questions too. So
are you gonna run for mayor?
I haven't made a decision what I'm doing beyond what I'm doing right now, Jerry. Should I give I'll give him the quote I gave you, Josh, the Robert Kennedy quote from 19.
So you certainly haven't ruled it out. You're leaving the door wide open to run for mayor, correct?
The Robert Kennedy quote that I gave Josh is, when you begin to think about doing other things, you have a tendency to change. You begin to plan for it, you can't help it. He was asked that in 1962 when he was Attorney General, and to his president, John Kennedy, his brother. And if he would have answered that question then, what happened, we know happened, he would have given the wrong answer. So that's where I'm at now, Jerry. Talk to me next year.
But you think you would do a really good job as mayor, do you not?
Yeah, I think if I ran as mayor, yes. I think if I ran as county supervisor, yes. I have a lot to learn. I'm not there yet. But it all comes down to is, am I going to continue to serve my constituents well and serve the city well? And then at that time, I'll make a decision. It's too far out.
What supervisorial district do you live in? Do you live in District 1?
District 1, yes.
Oh, well, you have a wonderful opportunity coming. You have until December 8th to sign up to run against us. I think that's something you ought to think about very
This
carefully.
is a guy who was asked at the Democratic Party, questions about his mother's politics.
But his
So
mother.
if he challenges Doss, I don't think that party is going to go for him. But I will say this, right, on your mayoral run, right, or your potential mayoral run. I mean, a Kristen Sneddon versus Eric Friedman for mayor. I mean, Jerry and I and Nick, man, we're going to be so,
Well,
so
Randy's
happy
going to
to
be
cover it.
Randy's going to be right in there too. So this
Randy,
is
I mean, Eric's not going to challenge Randy. Come
this
on.
is why we need a runoff for mayor, so we have a majority mayor. All right, we got to get out of here. We went way over. Good show, long show. Eric Friedman, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and we always appreciate your very thoughtful answers and your your intelligence about the issues the city's facing. Thanks again.
Thank you both.
Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time on Newsmakers.